Good evening. Waninakan natasui Samira nutoma sa kunahanat. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amira Madison, and I am an enrolled citizen of the Wampanoag tribe of Gayheda-Quina. And I'm so grateful to be here, to see all of your faces, and to have our incredible moderator and speakers this evening, and also to be doing this with Hartman. I think when we started talking about the panel discussions we wanted to do, we knew that we wanted to uplift our people across Turtle Island, across the United States and Canada. We wanted to shed light on the things that our people are doing, brilliant things, hard things, and we also are doing it with little resources. And so this evening, I hope that you take away the incredible work that our people are doing. So I'm going to pass it over to Hartman, who will introduce himself.
Waninakan, nataswis Hartman, nutmas masipia, ka ni masipi Wampanoag, nataya brightnut, kishkiuat. So good evening. My name is Hartman. I'm from Mashpee. I'm Mashpee Wampanoag, and I these days live in Brighton, kind of next to here, just down the river. And yeah, it's been great to see the work that's being done here at the Science Museum and work with Mira and bring this to the forefront. As Native people, I think we're often sort of thought of and pigeonholed into this idea of being historic or being spiritual or being these things, but truth of the matter is that we have always been deeply involved in sciences. And we have always looked at the world as our teacher. And if you look at the world as your teacher and you learn from the world and the environment around you, that is science. That is the fundamental part of what science is, to take what the world has to offer you and to learn from it. And we've had a lot of time to learn about this particular part of the world. We're going to talk about issues tonight of oceans and sea level rise. And for our folks, we've been here long enough that there was a time when our people were here and you could walk out to Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, and there's islands now where that water between them used to have villages where they're going to be putting up windmills on top of them. And we've been able to see the land change over this period of time and watch it all happen. We have that intimate relationship with this part of the world. And as coastal people, we have to be particularly concerned with all these things that are happening with the ocean due to the climate changing. And we can see that in the past, we've had villages that have gone underwater, that we can't go walk around now, and you can go swim down to the bottom of the bay maybe and find remnants of them, but to walk through them, you just can't do it anymore. We understand how the marshes and the rivers have changed their courses and the coastline has moved. We know where the saltwater has come further up the river into the freshwater areas. We have to deal with all these things, and there's lessons that we've been able to learn and hold on to, and we hope that maybe that some of these lessons and some of this knowledge and some of this experience might also be able to be passed on to you all and to the policymakers and decision makers and scientists, I guess, for a lack of a more specific title, because I think that we can all be citizen scientists, and that's something that I advocate for as well. So I hope tonight that we can sort of take in the sciences and the worldview and our approach as coastal Native people to these issues that we're facing, whether it's saltwater intrusion or the rising water lines, the coastal erosion, the whole shift of the Atlantic Gulf Stream that we see breaking down as the temperatures in the water change, as the ice in the north melts. We see all these things shifting in ways that we could never imagine, and we're going to see some drastic changes in the world. And how do we want to deal with that? Do we want to try to prevent it? Do we want to try to mitigate it? do we need to adapt to it? And I think that there's going to be answers that fall into all of those categories. I hope that we all can gain something from this conversation tonight. So thanks for coming out. And I guess with that, I'll turn it back to Amira to wrap up the introductions.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce, or I have the pleasure of introducing Joseph Lee, who is an Wampanoag journalist and the editor of Our Living Lands, a weekly radio segment that explores the impact of climate change on Indigenous communities. His work has also appeared in Grist, The Guardian, Vox, Science News, and more. He is the author of the book, Nothing More of This Land, forthcoming from One Signal Atria in July 2025, which is an exploration of Indigenous identity from Martha's Vineyard to Indigenous communities around the world. Please, with that, give a round of applause for Jojo, our moderator this evening.
Thank you, Amira. Always has to call me Jojo. And thanks everybody for being here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Jason and Siobhan, who I'll introduce in a minute. I really appreciated, Hartman, what you're saying about the different ways we can understand what science is and who can do science and who science belongs to. And in that spirit, I brought this poem that I wanted to read, which is by Chamorro lawyer and writer Julian Agon. And it's from his book, No Country for 8-Spot Butterflies, which, if you haven't seen it, it's this really slim but powerful volume. And the poem is called, We Have No Need for Scientists. We have no need for scientists to tell us things we already know, like the sea is rising and the water is getting warm. The inundated need no instruction in inundation. We have eyes of our own, and besides, we are busy scraping barnacles off our grandfathers' graves and other headstones drowned at high tide. We know how critical it is our coral reefs stay healthy and our mangrove forests dense. We'll defend them to the end, not because some study shows they provide protection from erosion or shelter from storms, but because our reefs are adoring aunts, feeding other people's children, and our mangroves mothers in their own right. And so I just wanted to start with that poem because I think it really distills a lot of what we're trying to talk about here, which is what Hartman also said very eloquently, that when we talk about science, it doesn't necessarily mean one thing. And when we talk about indigenous knowledge, it's not some mystical, spiritual thing in the past. And so what we're going to talk about here tonight is real work by real people, excellent guests that we have who are out there doing the work. And, they might not call themselves scientists. I don't know. We can talk about that. But I would say they're doing science. And I think they're doing science and they're practicing indigenous knowledge. And that's all wrapped up in this whole thing that we're trying to deal with here, which, climate change, all of these big topics. This is one way that we have to deal with this. And so I'm really excited to welcome our guests and begin this conversation. And hopefully you'll enjoy and learn something from it. First, I will introduce Jason Steiding. Jason is a native Cape Codder and Eagle Clan member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. In his role as Natural Resources Director of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, he strives to protect the natural resources that have ensured the survival and well-being of his people since time immemorial and to sustain these resources for the next 7 generations. Jason oversees all natural resource-related activities for the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, including fish and wildlife management, habitat protection and restoration, water resource management, food sovereignty, diadromous fish recovery, and tribal development and environmental policy analysis and implementation. And our next guest is Siobhan Smith. who's a member of the Shinnecock Nation and has spent the majority of her life on the tribe's peninsula. The remainder of Shinnecock homelands are on the eastern end of Long Island and touch the Shinnecock and Peconic Bays. Being a coastal community, climate impacts witnessed and experienced by tribal members are often visceral. Siobhan has spent many years developing partnerships and networks to address some of Shinnecock's climate concerns. She has worked for the Shinnecock Nation for 18 years and is also a member of 2 national committees that work to support, protect, and advocate for environmental protection in Indian country. So please welcome Jason and Siobhan. So, Jason, you want to start us off? I think you have some slides.
Good evening, folks. And thank you to the Museum of Science for inviting us here tonight. We're going to obviously get into a little bit more detailed discussion here, but I really quickly wanted to just kind of give a brief introduction on history of the tribe, the Master Wampanoag, what it is we do, and why. And I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I can in 5 minutes. Not going to be easy. Just a picture of a sign we have in Mashpee, a couple of those. But I wanted to really quickly give a map of our historical territory, which extends actually further, as far north as Gloucester, Mass., right here through Boston, down through what is now considered the South Shore, South Coast, Cape and the Islands, and eastern Rhode Island. It was a vast territory at one time, which we controlled and were the original stewards of. This is a map of our territory in present day. Essentially the same map, and if you look and squint, you can see the red areas are the areas that we now own and control. The lower portion on the Cape are a few parcels that the tribe owns in Mashpee, and up in the left-hand corner is a parcel that we own in Taunton. That is 1/10 of 1% of what was once our homelands. European colonization affected probably 99% of the lands of the native nations of this tribe. With Western development, there was a drastic and dramatic loss of habitat, biodiversity, and this accelerated climate change. And this is where we're at now in this day and age with all the problems and the issues that we have. It's very hard to affect change when you don't own land. It's very hard to affect change on your home lands when you don't control or have jurisdiction over your lands or your waterways. It's very, very difficult. I'm sure a lot of that will come up in today's discussions. So what does that mean? What do we do? Well, just like we have for thousands of years, every day we've got people who are out in the field trying to protect those lands, try to steward those lands. It's not just the Natural Resources Department, it's our tribal citizens, it's our families, it's our brothers, our sisters, our mothers. So really quickly, the tribe, we do water quality testing in our bays. We've got public meetings on some work we're doing for a harbor management plan. That's the right-hand side is our second in command, our Sagamore, Buddy Parknet, who is speaking actually with the then Department of the Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland, down in Mashpee, talking about the plight of our bays. And then the picture below is our Native environmental ambassadors. These are our tribal members, our youth. They're teenage kids who have a rights of herring movement. They're fascinating kids, so smart. They were actually right up the river, as Hartman was saying, this past year at a Watertown Dam Herring Festival. And they were speaking to the public about their commitment and their grassroots movement. Wonderful, wonderful kids. We can't do what we do as well without participation and cooperative agreements and partnerships. It's just impossible. We've got a bazillion going on, which I will hopefully be able to touch on in a little bit, but I just want to throw this one up there really quickly. This is a NOAA Transformational Habitat Grant that the tribe just received, and it's hard to see, but there are several partners that are on this project with us. The main one being the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. It's work on Mashpee River, habitat restoration, fish passage, among other things. And I just wanted to highlight that because it is very important that we do have these partnerships. And what I like about this project and why I wanted to highlight it too is that they have made it a point to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge into this entire process. This is a flyer that has literally just been finalized within the last couple of days and will go out to our tribal community very, very soon, electronically and through postcard form. We asked for, and they have approved, that we set up community meetings to have community members come to the table at the beginning of this project, not 80% through, not halfway through, at the very beginning. They're gonna affect policy, design, they're gonna have a say in this project from the very, very beginning, and they'll shape the way things look towards the end, and that is huge for us. And we'll probably explain why as we go. So that's gonna go out to the community. I'm very, very excited to get some folks at the table. And so what's at stake? You know, what's going on? What do things look like? Well, this is Wampanoag Bay. The tribe does run a 12-acre aquaculture grant. Obviously, we're people of the water and always have been. So this is basically what we've been doing for years, right? So it's our tie to the land. It's our sovereignty. And this is also our revenue. It's a business, right? And this is our jeopardy. There are water quality issues in Wampanoag Bay. Cyanobacteria blooms, algae blooms, and rising sea level and stronger tides could affect this grant. There's no telling what could happen and what this area might look like in 30, 50 years. And so, this is obviously an area of concern. And, obviously our rivers and our fisheries. This is a picture of Mashpee River in the fall. It's a beautiful river, and herring going up Mashpee River. Herring are probably the most culturally significant fish in our society. They signify the start of spring. They signify the start of the Wampanoag New Year. When they're in the river, to plant get your gardens ready, and it's a wonderful, wonderful time in the community. They're running now, actually. We call them scouts, the first few that come up in the river. But that fishery is in danger, and for many reasons. Impaired water. Fish passage concerns with culverts and dams. So again, we're working hard to protect this fishery and these fish in these rivers, so that young tribal member there can go to the river and scoop up some herring for dinner or for bait or for the garden. And I think it was Hartman that touched on it. He talked about the 7 generations, and this is part of what we do, the reason why we're working so hard to do what we do, and why our ancestors before us worked so hard to do what they do. We think about our 7 generations, the next 7 generations, in our youth. And I really do worry, what my kids and my grandkids, what things will look like for them in the next 30, 40, 50 years. I've seen such drastic change in my 55 years. I can only imagine what they're gonna see. And these are pictures that were just taken this last year. We've got kids on the Childs River. We've got kids on the Santua Preserve, where there was a Eastern White Cedar project, and down below on one of our marshes doing core sampling. This is during our summer science camp. I don't know if any of these locations will be around or be underwater or be affected in the next 30, 40, 50 years. I do not know. But it's important that we protect it, and these kids here are the reason why. So thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to talking to you in a little bit.
Thank you, Jason. And Siobhan, if you want to just give a sort of brief, we mentioned it in the introduction, but explain a little bit about your work and the impacts of climate change that you're seeing on your territory.
Sure. So first I want to tell my Wampanoag relatives, thank you for the invitation. And second, I would like to say I did not bring slides, but ditto. Everything he said. That's no, I'm just kidding. So good evening. My name is Siobhan Smith. I'm a member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation. I'm from the eastern end of Long Island. Southampton is in the territory of the Shinnecock Indian Nation. We have about 1,000 acres remaining of our ancestral homelands. That includes the Neck, which is the peninsula that reaches out into Shinnecock Bay. And about 15 miles from there is another portion of land that we call West Woods that reaches into the Peconic Estuary. I've spent the last 18 years working for my community. When I first started out, I was working in the aquaculture program. So we've been growing oysters, raising oysters, reseeding the bay, oysters, clams, and I was the office assistant and just kind of worked my way up to the point where I'm now the environmental director. And I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations. I'm responsible for developing the program, forming the partnerships, and managing staff. We have about 9 dedicated tribal members that work for us, in addition to one non-tribal member who is our natural resource manager. So we call our program an environmental department, and that encompasses the natural resources. So the natural resource manager is within the environmental department. We also have a food sovereignty program. We have a community garden that I inherited from another program about 10 years ago, and we've extended it. A few years back, the council allocated allotted is the word we use, about 3 acres so that I could turn it into a farming area. So far, we've only cleared 1/4 of an acre because I'm not ready to expand it quite yet. I don't think we're there, but I just know that those are the plans and that's what we're working towards. We work with a number of federal agencies. In addition to the EPA, we work with the USDA, we work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we work with, right now we're getting ready to work with the National Federation of Fish and Wildlife. We recently received a grant to continue the restoration work that we've been doing along the peninsula. Back in 2015 was the first time when we started working on our shoreline, which was part of our climate change plan. And we were able to do over 3,000 feet, and we put about 32,600 cubic yards of sand back onto our shoreline that we had lost over the years during, due erosion, wave energy, wind, storm surge. And so it's necessary to continue that work at the other side of the peninsula, but it'll be a different type of process. It won't be necessarily beach nourishment. We're looking more to kind of reinforce the shoreline in a natural way. We believe in living shorelines. I know that some people find them controversial and think that they don't last, but I think one of the important things about using a natural shoreline is restoring the area as much as possible to what it was, because that's where you get those ecosystem services. That's the benefit. When people do the hard shoreline armoring, all it does is send the wave energy somewhere else, and it just becomes someone else's problem. That's not good neighbors. We're experiencing that from the other side of our waterways. We have an annual program where we work with the youth. So we usually have between 5 and 8 interns that come out and spend the summer with us, because we are trying to hopefully raise the next person who wants my job, right? I can't do it forever. We also work with the BIA. We have a lot of different projects, but I guess I'll cut it short there. That way we can get into the conversation. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. So, Tabutne.
Thank you. Yeah, I was lucky enough to visit Shinnecock Nation, and Siobhan showed me around last summer, and the things that she's describing, the shoreline, it's almost hard to explain how real it is. When we talk about sea level rise and climate change and losing land and territory, it's literally, you're standing here, you're looking at this dune, the shoreline they're trying to rebuild, oyster reef and all this stuff, and 5 feet behind you is the cemetery. And 20 feet on the other side, there's someone's home. And so it's not some abstract thing, it's happening right now. And Jason, I want to come back to you, and you mentioned some of the really great collaborations you have. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about why collaboration is so important in this work and the unique role that traditional Indigenous knowledge plays in that collaboration. Because I think sometimes people hear collaborating with Indigenous science, and they have this misconception that it's like Indigenous people bring some sort of like ancient wisdom, and then the scientists come in with their machines and their data, but it's really not like that at all. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, we don't walk in the room and the flute music doesn't start, right? The partnerships are important, quite frankly, because most of these partnerships are through grants, and the grants are actually bringing in money. to our community, and capacity. Very often, these grants will provide us funding for my time, my staff's time, and if allowable, we can bring on new staff to help with this project-specific opportunity or just in general. So having that is huge for us, and it helps us build capacity. It also comes very often with technical training. There are certain things that we do not know and definitely certainly need help with. And that technical training part of it is very important to us. It just opens up so many opportunities for you through these partnerships. That slide I showed you, I think, had six or seven organizations on it. And you can just learn a lot of things outside of your comfort zone. And when you mentioned how traditional ecological knowledge plays a part in that, let me just explain, if I could, what it sort of means. To me, it's traditional knowledge is like the systems that have been developed and maintained for generation after generations for thousands of years. And I say systems because there are so many parts to it. And each part is deeply connected to nature, the environment, natural resources, our spirituality, agriculture, governance, and there are so many pieces of it. It's just so important that comes along with it, because this is knowledge that's important. And it's knowledge that's unique, and I say that because it's not in your history books. This is history that's told over generations and generations, typically orally, through stories or rituals. And again, a PhD student doesn't have access to this knowledge. And if you think about it, if you're a people who have been on the same land in the same region for 10,000 years. Who would you go to if you want to know what's happened to the land? What do you think is going to happen to the land? What's happening to the land now and why? And these folks who are scientists and consultants, they need that information, and it's important that they have it.
Yeah, I really like that perspective of being a system. And that actually reminds me of, Siobhan, what you're saying and something we've talked about, like green versus gray infrastructure and living shorelines. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how, it may not be a specific like concept or belief, but it's kind of just a way of thinking that you bring to this work and trying to understand this as a holistic project rather than, we're just going to fix this one thing. It's trying to address sort of the big picture.
Sure. So, I did want to speak also to the collaboration part. And I think that ties into my response to that. So in addition to, technical support, capacity building, leveraging of resources, assisting with grants, a lot of our partners that we work with also become strong advocates for us. And when you're working in a field that is heavy in science, and a lot of times the perspectives don't always line up, right? And so when you have someone that has spent a number of years working with you, interacting with your community, understanding the lay of the land, understanding your perspective, why you do the things that you do, why you think the way that you think, it gives them the ability to then help interpret, for lack of a better word, right? And so I think that's how collaborations also are great resources, not only for tribes, but small communities, any community that doesn't necessarily have the technical know-how for some things, because it is, sometimes you really do need an engineer. For instance, with our cemetery, we just recently was able to receive some funding through the BIA to get an environmental engineer who can look at the site and look at the way it's flooding and look at the way the water pulls in and pulls back out and help us come up with a plan. So the traditional knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, the ecological knowledge, however, you want to use that term, comes with knowing that you have to have conversations with people. I spent a lot of time early on we had our first climate change adaptation plan in 2013. That's a long time ago. A lot has happened and a lot has changed since then. But before we even met with a consultant who helped us get all that onto paper, we spent a lot of time talking to our elders. We asked them, no matter how simple you think it is, tell us something that you see has changed. Tell us something that you're concerned about. What looks different from when you were a child to now? And those were the types of things that we then sat down with someone and got onto paper and put it in terms that then became a plan, right? It became something that we could take to funders and say, this is what we need to do based on the information that was gathered not only by our elders and people in the community, but by scientists and those models that were being generated about what climate change was going to bring in our direction. What was it going to look like when sea level rise was coming? And New York is actually experiencing sea level rise at a quicker rate than they originally thought. So time is getting smaller, right? It is shrinking. And our ability to respond is not always in our best interest to be, what can we do to prevent it, but what can we do to adapt to it? And I think that's what has been the biggest part of tribal communities is their ability to survive because they adapt. They adapt to what is happening around them. And that's what we're doing right now, just trying to survive and adapt.
I think that's also a really important point about when we talk about indigenous knowledge. It's not like pulling something from the past. It's constantly adapting, evolving, responding to the environment. And I think what you were saying also about, it's like bringing people in and finding ways to build those relationships. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Jason, about sort of the importance of that. I mean, I think we're all here because we care about indigenous knowledge, but we also care and are concerned about climate change and the planet and the environment. And it's not finding ways to work by yourself, it's finding ways to work with other folks.
No, I mean, Siobhan made some wonderful points, and like I was saying, we don't know a lot of things, and every now and then you do need an engineer on a project, right? And these consultants, they bring vast knowledge that's just not available to a lot of us. So what we bring and what they bring, the Western science and the traditional ecological knowledge, they go well together. And I love the point you made about obviously going to the elders, right? I've got certain people in the community that are just my go-tos. I'm constantly calling them up, and I need feedback or I need questions. And there's one example I'd like to bring up. We're working with the I forgot the name of it now, the Urban Harbor Institute, and I think they're with UMass Boston here, and they're putting together a harbor management plan in our community. And that plan started out with the town of Mashpee, and essentially what they were looking to do was map out a plan for docks and marinas and that sort of thing in the town, and how that's going to look in the next several years. And slowly but surely, they brought the tribe in because we had some interest on what that was going to look like too, because we've got issues with boats and moorings and that sort of thing in our waterways. And so that conversation then led to another conversation, which was access to the ocean and to the bays. We're a coastal community, and we have pretty much zero access to the water because the bays and the oceans, they're littered with $1 million homes and it's private property. So that's an issue in itself. So Urban Harbor Institute was in Mashpee, and they had these maps out on the table, and they had identified on the maps 4 locations that they knew of in the entire town where you could actually access a certain area. I think 1 was on a bay and 3 were on the ocean. Then the very next meeting, we brought in some tribal members. I think there were 12 of us in the gymnasium at our government center. And when we had the map out, we had another conversation for about an hour and a half. We identified 100 locations where there were historic, either trails, ancient ways, or places where we could get to the water. 50 years ago, 30 years ago. And to their credit, they actually identified those locations. and put those on the map, and we'll now incorporate those into the plan. So, bringing the elders in and that sort of thing, and having that type of knowledge, they would have never known about these locations if Buddy Potnet, our career life shell fisherman who has been on the water his entire life, couldn't point out all these locations. And people like my father and these guys who grew up on the water when there were no homes, right? So that type of thing is very, very important. It's very subtle, but if you bring the people to the table, that's what happens, right?
It's a really good example, and I think we need more of those examples. We've been talking about the positives of collaboration and these great projects you're working on, but I think the reality is also that we wouldn't be here talking about this if that always happened. And I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on, what needs to happen for some of these ideas and worldviews to maybe be respected a little bit more, or listened to, or considered as science. I think there's been sort of a growing movement in that direction in recent years, but we're not fully there, where there is still this divide between, Western science and indigenous knowledge. Where do you think we need to go from here, or how would that happen?
It took me a while to sort of find my footing and to have the courage to ask and demand that be a part of it. And I have to say, I think we're at a point, at least in Mashpee, where we have really good relationships with a lot of the organizations that are on the Cape. The local organizations, because you can deal with them. They're in your community. EPA, BIA, that sort of thing. That's a whole different animal, right? But if you get the local organizations, the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, the Nature Conservancy, Coastal Zone Management, Webner, that sort of thing, they've been very, very receptive to the idea of traditional ecological knowledge. And for a long time, it was extractive too. Meaning folks would just kind of come into your community and pull it out without consulting with you. And that's not the way to do it. You've got to come to the community, you've got to sit down at the table with the community members on more than one occasion and listen and learn. And if you're willing to do that, then it's a wonderful relationship. And that is happening. That's happening in Mashpee. I cannot deny it. The town of Mashpee and all these other organizations and civic groups that we work with are really starting to recognize the importance of it, accepting it. And one other thing I'll add too is just in case, right, there's someone here. When you're in the room, we like to say it has to be, the conversations have to be authentic, they have to be real, and we talk about establishing safe places, which means, we have to be able to communicate, we have to be able to say what's on our mind without offending or taking offense, and we have to know that, the information that we're providing, you take into consideration. And outside of that, if we can make that work, then these relationships that we are establishing, they are real. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the people that I work with, they feel like family to me now. They're very, very close to me, and they're very important people in my life and to the tribe's life. So it's really looking up in that regard. It's a long way to go, but in 3 years I've seen really dramatic change.
So, I'll be very diplomatic. So I live in an area that is so many jurisdictions. So there's a Southampton town, but then there's a Southampton village. And then there's the part where the state controls something. And then there's the part where the county controls something. And so something as simple as addressing the concern of a stormwater drain is not that easy. And so you can have conversations with the townspeople, right? And the townspeople are like, yeah, we really need to do something about that, right? But government is a whole other conversation. And I'm not in a leadership role in my community. I'm not an elected leader. So some of those conversations that are had behind closed door, I'm not always privy to. But I know that there are some things that would be a lot more beneficial to my nation if it was evident that we were all on the same page for protecting resources. And there's a lot that can be said and a lot that can be written down, but action always speaks louder than words or anything on paper, right? So there's a particular body of water that is on our eastern side. And I think one of the biggest things that we as a human race face is the ability to really come together, right? To really come together. And I'm not talking about just kumbaya. I'm talking about picking a common goal, right? So if we're looking at the water and we know that the water quality is poor, but if I tell you that my people have to eat out of that water, but your people aren't doing the same thing, it's not of the same value, right? But even if your people aren't eating out of that water, you should find it important that we are and say, hey, what can we do together to clean this water body? How can we change our daily behaviors so that it improves the environment, not just for human use, but for the sake of restoring the ecosystem so that it can function the way it's supposed to? And so I think part of the biggest problem with really addressing climate change issues is that there are small pockets working in small silos. But what we need is big, multi-jurisdictional efforts. Federal, tribal nations, states, villages, towns, we all need to collectively decide that it's important that that water is usable for people, but also that it's usable for the animals and the plants that live in it. And so when we talk about collaboration, that would be true collaboration. Those would be lasting impacts that your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. And imagine how wonderful that would be if we were the generation that actually pulled that off. So that's my pie in the sky. And I think about that a lot. But in the meantime, I got to keep working with the federal agencies because they're my advocates. And right now, they're going to help me with that storm drain.
It sounds like what you're saying is part of the answer is what Jason said. It's building those local relationships and on small scale and building from there. You both also talked about this concept of sort of getting things done now, but preparing for the future, ensuring that these things exist for the future. And I know that earlier on you both touched on working with youth, and I know both of you have various youth projects, and I think everyone would really love to hear about those projects. And, you know, I think we all believe in that project, that sort of broader mission, but what specifically you're doing and why that's such a key part of this work, not like a side part of it. It's central to the mission.
Sure, yeah, I love working with our youth. It's probably the best part of my job, quite frankly. One of the things that we do every year, we run a 5-week summer camp. It's called Preserving Our Homelands. We call it POH Camp. It's a 5-week summer camp. It's geared towards middle school students, so the age group is like 10 to 13. And it's a blend of Western science and traditional ecological knowledge. So during those 5 weeks, we'll bring in our partners, our local partners, our federal partners, and we will teach Western science. So we might talk about water quality or what the EPA does or why USGS is in the water or what these sea level rise meters are doing out in Papaneset Bay, and have them speak to that work and what they're doing. And then at the same time, every day we have what is called a culture keeper, who is traditionally an elder, but doesn't always have to be, who at the same time relates to the kids how that Western science relates to their culture, and how perhaps we used to monitor the sea level rise back, 100 years ago or 150 years ago, whatever. So it's a really nice blend of Western science and traditional ecological knowledge every day. And we're able to get the kids out into the woods. We're able to get them out on the water. We typically will visit a university for one of the weeks. So we get some of these kids in a university setting, in a dorm setting, get them into a residence hall or a dining common, just to give them that feel of what college life is like as well, right? And they really do enjoy it. Another thing that just recently came up, there's an issue with mental health and depression, especially in indigenous societies and with our youth. Some of it is just historical traumas, and some of it for our youth is just the fact that they're not in the woods, they're not on the water, they're on their phones, and they're not in the environment, they're not interacting with their environment, and it's proven to be very, very difficult, extremely difficult to get these kids interested in the sciences and to get them out in the woods. We were having discussions earlier today about when we were younger. Our parents didn't know where we were or what we were doing. As long as you were home by the time they told you, you were good. And I had a wonderful childhood like that. I would never, ever change anything about my childhood growing up. And I'll be honest, I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they haven't even come close to having that type of childhood as much as I've tried. And I'm always in the woods and on the water. So we received some funding recently through a foundation, actually, the Schmidt Family Foundation, to attack what's called cultural connectedness, which is to get these kids, again, outside, in the woods, on the water, practicing their culture, practicing what's really inherent in them they just don't know. We're trying to open up those opportunities for them. So we went out, we were able to purchase hunting gear and fishing gear. We just started it. We've put out advertisements to our tribal communities. Our hope is that we'll get kids interested, we'll get them in the woods, we'll get them in the water, we'll get them registered, we'll get them through hunter safety courses, we'll get them their Wampanoag IDs, which is important because that will serve as their state license, which will give them the rights to fish and hunt whenever they want, however they want. And so that's another program that we've rolled out really recently that I'm really excited about and hopeful for. And then just really quickly, I had the slide up that showed the Native Environmental Ambassadors. These are a little bit more of our teenage kids, but I don't run this program, but I have a lot of involvement in it. And actually my daughter is one of the Native Environmental Ambassadors, and they are in the midst of a grassroots movement right now for the rights of herring. And they've traveled all over. They've been to California. They've been to New York Climate Week. They were down in North Carolina recently. They've had cultural exchanges in Sitka, Alaska. And they are just talking about the plight of the herring at home, what can be done, how important it is, and to recognize these herring as our relations, as humans, because they are our relations. And the way we look at it is the animals, the fish, the trees, they are our relations. If you had an aunt or your grandmother was sick and she was troubled, you would want to do anything you could to help her and to make things better. And that's the way we look at it with the herring. And these kids, they're fantastic. They've created an ordinance, they've had resolutions passed, and they're doing great work too. And so I like to, whenever I can, highlight what they're doing. And they play an important role in my camp as well, and they'll play an important role in this cultural connectedness youth program that we've just started too. So, I love it. It's so important, right? Because again, the other thing I fear too is that we'll lose culture, right? In 50 years, if these kids aren't practicing or don't realize what their culture is or are not knowledgeable about it, I don't know what the culture will actually look like. And that frightens me. That really does scare me.
It's true. The kids are amazing. You should look up their work with Rights of Herring. And just another reminder, if you have a question to do this Slido thing, got a lot of great questions coming in. We're probably not going to get to all of them, but if you have one, feel free to stick it in and we'll try to get to it. But Siobhan, if you want to just quickly talk about your work with the youth and then we'll get to the questions.
Sure. So through our food sovereignty program, we have a year-round program where seasonally we teach the children how to find all the food that's available on Shinnecock. So in the late fall, early winter, that's when they spend their time hunting. They've learned how to track, hunt, they've learned to field dress, they've learned to butcher. Then we have tribal members come in and teach them how to cook the different foods that they've gotten. In the summertime, we do the fishing, we do the clamming, we do the crabbing. We teach them how to find what plants that are able to eat. We teach them not to eat anything that they're not certain of. We have community gardens, so the kids spend time in the gardens. They learn how to grow food. They're going to learn how to do seed saving. We have a Boys and Girls Club, and so in addition to the work that we do in the environmental department, the Boys and Girls Club is really big into all those types of activities too. So our food sovereignty program is a big age range. So we start with, I think our youngest person, he is 8, and it goes all the way up to however old you still are interested in it. As I stated before, then during the summertime, we always have our internships. We have between 5 and 8 kids. They start at the age 12 all the way up to 18. So it's usually the people that are in high school. We've taken them, so just this past summer, we were fortunate that over there at Mashantucket, I do that all the time, the Pequot people, the Pequots were hosting the Food Sovereignty Summit. And so we took the youth over there. They had a good time. I think it was a little dry for them. They weren't as enthusiastic about it as I was. But things like that, we take them to the local science centers. We take them into the city so that they can go to the botanical gardens and things, learn about the different plants. And in fact, in the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, one of the tribal members there, some of the native species plants that are there, you can go there and there's the audio where you can listen to her tell you about the plants, tell you the different traditional uses for it. So we took the kids there so that they could see that. So that's what we try to do with the youth, really keep them involved in the culture, but also environmental protection. So your cultural resources are actually your natural resources. So whenever you're doing that, you're handling both things at once.
Thank you. All right, getting to questions. I'm going to try and combine some a little bit so we can cover as many as possible. Partnerships, connections, and true and trusting collaboration takes time. Traditional ecological knowledge has been and continues to be built over a long time. How do you reconcile the long-term time frame with the need for change now? So thinking about how to balance sort of these long developing big picture things with the immediate climate crisis. How do you approach that?
You want to go? Oh, okay. So, I mean, the most important part is having a plan, right? So you have to have a plan that's going to go out pretty far. But then you also have to realistically chunk off things, right? So we know that flooding is occurring right now in our community on a consistent basis. So do we have long-term planning to address it? Yes, our long-term planning is finding money to continue. Actually, I can reverse that. Our short-term plan is finding money to continue restoring the shoreline. Our long-term plan is, unfortunately, we may have to find somewhere to relocate. So our council has had discussions about where would we go collectively if we had to go somewhere. And the crazy thing about that is, it was like 2018, Columbia University was doing a conference called Managed Retreat, and I was asked if I would come and do a presentation on it. And one of the things that struck me was the scientists, the social scientists, and the living scientists, the natural scientists, when they were getting up and talking about it, managed retreat. It was so sterile. It was so disconnected and so inhumane, right? And so the title of my presentation was Relocation is More Than Just an Address Change, right? You're talking about the possibility of having to take a whole nation that their identity collectively is tied to place, right? If you took coastal people and removed them from the shoreline, generations, that is traumatic change, your lifestyle completely different. And so that's a long-term plan. What are we going to do? In the interim, the houses that are along the shoreline may have to be raised, or we may have to move them inward. Currently, we're working with Columbia University on a flood mitigation plan. And part of that is assessing the home lines that are along the shoreline and seeing just that. Are we going to have to lift them? Are we going to have to move them in? How can we reinforce them? So to answer your question, long-term planning is unfortunately relocation. Short-term planning is how do we continue reinforcing our shoreline in a way that works with the environment and works with Mother Nature. And that's sand, that's grass, that's oyster reefs, that's eelgrass in the water. You know, that's adjusting your oyster reef depending on, like, the USGS right now, currently, scientists are helping us. They're studying where the sand is moving to along our shoreline. They're studying where the wind is pushing it, how far the fetches is what they call it. And then that's going to help us say, all right, when we're going to take our oyster reef, are we going to build it higher? Are we going to begin to stagger it and add multiple layers? So that's the type of information, again, that's where science comes in and reinforces what we were already doing, right? What we knew we wanted to do, which was maintain our shoreline as naturally as possible. And I'm gonna stop now because I will keep talking, Jason.
I know you. Yeah, it's a really difficult question to ask, and the reason I say that is because it feels like at every angle there's something that's being thrown at you, some type of adversity that's related to climate. And what we found out pretty quickly is if you've really got to prioritize what your needs are and what your most urgent needs are, because you can fall down that rabbit hole where an opportunity comes and you're just thinking, yeah, what the heck? I mean, it sounds like a good opportunity. This is pretty relevant to our community. It's got some money, it's got capacity, and then you get into the middle of it and it's a year and a half later and you're like, this is just not really relevant. It's way more work than it needs to be. We're not getting anything out of it. And you've just spun your wheels for 18 months. So having that community engagement, asking the community what their needs are. We send out surveys constantly. What are your fears? What do you see? What's going on, like you said, so that we can have feedback and we can know what's important. Because my natural resources department is 5 people. We do not speak for our entire community, and we cannot speak for our entire community. So if we know what our priorities are and what the most urgent priorities are, then we can focus on those project-specific goals, not spin our wheels, and really, I hate to say it, but not waste our time, because it has happened. When we first started this, we wanted to be everything to everyone. We took off, chasing money, really. And we bit off way more than we can chew, and it was really to our detriment. So that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, thank you. There are a number of questions in this vein of what can we do as folks living in the city, college students, educators who maybe believe in this work, are interested, but not directly involved right now. What would you say to people like that? How could they get involved, or how could they support this work?
I would tell anyone, and I always say this, if you really want to get involved, you can call me. Call my cell phone, call me at work, you can find me, and come to the community. I'll invite you down, we'll bring you to our government center. We have a beautiful 40,000 square foot building. Cape Cod is a wonderful place to be. We're surrounded by water. We'll take you out on some of our sites. We'll take you to some of our properties. And we'd love to have you down to Mashpee. It's that simple, honestly. Call me and we'll see what we can do. I'm busy, you're busy, everyone is busy, but I'm sure we could figure something out. And I mean that, honestly. Please, come to the community.
I mean, if I'm being honest, I might not quite have understood the question because I didn't think it was specific to helping Native communities? Was it? Or was it just how could they be involved in general? Because if you're talking about just being involved in general, I think there's lots of opportunities to volunteer, and I think there's lots of advocacy work that needs to be done. And I think that especially now when we're living in a time where environmental issues are going to begin to be downplayed, be minimized. Lee Zeldin is from Long Island. I'm not very confident in some of the 5 pillars of EPA right now. So I think that, not to get political, but I'm saying advocacy is important, right? And using your voice. And if you have a something that you're passionate about, and I think that survival, I mean, people in urban areas, flooding is a big issue for people in urban areas. You don't have anything to absorb the water, right? It's all pavement. You got inundated storm drains. So I think that advocating and speaking up for climate change issues is very important for urban people. But yeah, you can also volunteer in tribal communities. I don't hand out my cell phone number, but I've got an email address, and it's just my name, Siobhan@shinnecock.org. We've had plenty of organizations that have come, helped us plant beach grass, help us with our oysters. They've helped us in the garden. We're always looking for subject matter experts, right? So I think I answered the question 2 ways. Okay?
Outstanding. You said not to get political, but based on the questions, it's obviously something on a lot of people's minds. We had one question about the recently halted federal national nature assessment, which would have been the first ever. Some questions about funding being halted, which you've kind of mentioned. I think in this work and in this conversation, sort of a potentially grim future outlook has always been part of the conversation, but I think people are maybe feeling that a little bit more acutely now in terms of funding and policy. So how do you approach that in your work?
Our biggest funder in Mashpee is the Environmental Protection Agency. So there is a lot of concern. And we talk to them on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. And, there's a lot, they're very nervous. There's a lot of uncertainty, especially in the Boston office about, layoffs and funding and what that looks like. And, we've had discussions internally. This is funding that comes to us every year. It's formula funding, in a pretty significant amount. And I've been hearing discussions. I was at a conference last week in Rhode Island, and some of the folks were saying that they've been hearing that EPA will get abolished and some of that responsibility will fall onto each state. And if that's the case, that would be horrible for us in Mashpee. And I'm hearing that with a lot of the other federal agencies that we deal with. In its current state, it does feel like if something has been committed or money has been obligated, that it's not at risk. But at the same time, I have also heard of money that has been obligated that certain agencies do not have access to right now. That money has been frozen. It hasn't affected me yet. I wouldn't be surprised if it will. It's all happened so quickly that I wish I could tell you I had this wonderful contingency plan, but we don't. So we're just trying to get creative. We have had internal discussions about some of the money that may potentially be gone or be in jeopardy. What can we do to overcome that? What's the next plan? How do we, keep our staffing levels the same and do the same amount of work that we're doing now if and when something were to happen? It's challenging times. I mean, we were having this discussion downstairs. It's fast and it's furious. And it's uncharted waters for us. But, we keep plugging along. You mentioned the fact that we adapt. We always have adapt. We're adapting now. But yeah, it's scary times. It really is.
I mean, I don't have anything to really add. I would say that the tactic and the swiftness at which all of this happened is like a shock and awe. And for a very short period of time, I think that in my mind, I was trying to think like this can't even be real. And then I said, no, this is really happening. And so my tribal nation did begin. We came up with internal plans of what we were going to do with the best that we could, because we're grant heavy. Our tribe is grant heavy. We have some economic development, but our neighbors are always suing us. So, so it's unsettling, but I try very hard not to let it prevent me from the job that's in front of me. And so we show up to work every day. We are still implementing our work plans. We're keeping in touch with the agency. They're responding to us as much as possible. We have been impacted. I've never seen one of these before. So we received a termination letter from one of our funding agencies for money that they had allocated to us. And it no longer effectuates the priorities of the agency. And I said, well, I'll tell you what no one longer effectuates. But but no, it's a sign of the time, and we're resilient, and we're gonna figure it out. And I think the saving grace is that we do have a little bit of a buffer being in tribal communities. We do. We're a vulnerable community, but we're also a strong community. And I think we've actually got we got a little leverage. We do.